Hi guys, and in today's video we're going to take an in-depth look at the RAmar. Hi guys, and in today's video what we're going to do is we're going to continue the series of class guides for PSO. Now this will mainly relate to PSO Blueburst, but a lot of the information that's in this guide you'll be able to use in episode 1 and 2 for the GameCube and Xbox as well. Things may differ slightly for the Dreamcast version, so just bear that in mind if you are watching this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the RAmar class. We're going to go through some of the advantages and disadvantages of the class, where it excels, where it struggles. And we're also going to go through some gear recommendations and typically what the RAmar's role would be in a party. And we'll also cover areas of the game that they might be better at and areas that you might want to avoid. So first of all, what does RAmar actually mean? So PSO uses this naming system where it basically lists the class first, and then there is a suffix which relates to what gender and race the character is. So we covered it in the previous one, but last video we did was the Hugh New Earl, and that meant that Hugh stood for hunter, New meant Newman, and Earl is a female suffix. So for RAmar, it's much simpler. So the RA stands for Ranger, so you know that it's a Ranger class character. And Mar is the suffix that's used for male humans. So RAmar basically means male human ranger. So that's what RAmar actually means. What we'll do now is we'll have a quick look at the stats. So I've just made this brand new RAmar, so level 1, and this is straight out of creation. So, and if we go to the stat layout, what we've got is our stats listed here. Now bear in mind we do have a base mag equip which will give us an extra 5 defense. So this is your starting layout. Now, when you first look at this stat layout, there's probably one stat that will jump out to you quite quickly, and that is the ATA. So RAmar actually has the highest ATA, which is attack accuracy, of any class in the entire game. So, unlike the Hugh New World that we covered in the last video, accuracy is not a problem for RAmar at all. You will not struggle to hit things generally, unless it's things with extremely high evade, then you might have the occasional issue, but generally you're not going to be missing that often with this class. So if we look at the base stats breakdown for RAmar, and we compare it to some of the other classes in the game, what you'll find is, so at level 1, if we take RAmar, the health is fairly average, to be honest. It's obviously lower than all of the hunters. It's actually equivalent to about the same as a 4-mar or a 4-mal, so it is sort of on the mid to low side. Then if we move on to things like TP, our TP is very, very low. We're some of the lowest in the game for this. It's actually lower than the hunters as well, which is surprising. For attack power, we're kind of where you would expect, really. So we are a little bit lower than the hunters, but we're obviously significantly higher than any of the force classes. Accuracy, as we've covered previously, RAmar has the highest ATA of any class in the game. So you can see we start with 80 ATA, and this is without any accuracy boosting gear equipped, which is really, really nice. For our evade and mental strength, so for our mental strength, that is quite low, as you would probably expect. We've obviously got low TP, so with low TP comes low mental strength. Reason for that is because your TP is dictated partially by your mental strength. For evade, our evade's actually not too bad. So it is better than the Android Rangers at least. It's a little bit behind the Hunter classes, but it is a pretty respectable evade overall. And look, as I've mentioned before, look never changes by level. You have to increase that by gear or materials. If we then move on to level 200, and if we go to level 200 without using any materials, what we'll find is that our TP is actually the lowest in the entire game. So for any class that can use text, because obviously androids will always have 0 TP, but any class that can use text, RAmar is the weakest of any class in the game for that. So you're typically not going to use many attack text with RAmar. To be honest, there isn't much need to. If we move on to attack power, we have a fairly decent attack power overall. We are a little bit behind the hunters, but honestly, we're not too far behind Hugh New World. Our defense is fairly low. Our mental strength is very low. That's actually 505 at level 200, which is really, really bad. That again is without materials, without any gear equipped to boost that. Our accuracy at level 200, again, without any materials. Well, there's no accuracy materials, but without any gear that boosts accuracy, our accuracy actually goes to 230, which is huge. So you're really not going to have many accuracy problems with this class. And our evade is kind of middle of the road, really. If we then take into consideration maximum stats, so maxing everything we can, what we find is that for health, we're actually sitting pretty well. Maximum stats actually, because RAmar is a human class, it can use a lot more materials than humans or androids. And because of that, we can actually boost our HP by quite a significant amount. So we can actually end up with a maximum of 1,770, which is pretty strong. It's actually far more than a Hu will. Actually beats it actually beats most of the other hunter classes, actually. So we actually have more health than Seal, Hu will, and we have slightly more than RAmar as well. Our TP, again, it maxes at just over 1,000. It's about 1,100, which is not brilliant. If we move on to other stats that we're actually strong at, so our accuracy with maximum attack accuracy boosting gear equipped, we're looking at a maximum ATA of 249, which is just colossal. That's really, really good because a lot of ranger weapons are tied to your accuracy for their equip requirements. So typically what you will find is that a lot of hunter weapons will require attack power, a lot of force weapons will require mental strength, but for range weapons it's usually attack accuracy. So if we look at this handgun, you can see here that it says ATA needed 68. So our accuracy being that high means that we get much earlier access to a lot of the range weapons. So next, if we move on to techniques. So RAmar, because they are a human class, they do get access to basic techniques. As I've covered previously, their TP and their mental strength is very low, so you're not going to get much mileage out of them. But just to cover it, so with a RAmar, we have access to all of the simple attack techniques. We don't on this character just because we're just level 1, we haven't learned anything yet. But we get access to Foi, Zonde, and Barter up to level 15. We get Gifoi, Gizonde, Gibarta up to level 15. We get Rafoi, Razonde, and Rabarta up to level 15. We don't get access to Grants or to Megid. We get level 15 Rester. We get Anti up to level 5. That's a slight issue because Anti level 5, I believe, can't cure freeze. I think you need Anti level 7 to get rid of freeze on someone else. So RAmar has limited support with Anti, but it can still get rid of some other statuses as well. We don't get access to Reverser. And then for our support techniques, so male humans are actually quite strange for the support techniques. The way they work is they tend to get access to some of them at a limited level. So for RAmar, if we look at these support techniques, we've got Shifter, Deban, Jelen, Zala, and Ryuka. So we get Ryuka because every class can get that's able to use techniques. For RAmar, what we do is we get access to level 15 Shifter, and we get access to level 15 Deband, so we can buff ourselves, but we don't get access to Jelen or Zalur, so you can't debuff enemies. So the support attacks are quite limited on this class, so although you are able to increase your stats, you're not able to decrease the enemy, so just be aware of that. Now, to be honest, that's not a huge problem with RAmar because you are going to be fighting from range a lot of the time. So being able to debuff an enemy's attack isn't as important because it's probably going to be quite a distance from you anyway. Not having Zalur does hurt a little bit because that defense drop that it applies to enemies is quite useful. So not having that does hurt a bit. There are ways of getting that though, which I'll come on to. So with that said, what are the main strengths of RAmar? So obviously we've already covered the accuracy is quite a big one. So having that much accuracy enables you to hit things really easily early on. And because of that, you can lay down quite reliable fire overall. It's unlikely that you're going to have big dips in your accuracy where you start missing constantly. So it's quite useful to have like a reliable accuracy. What that also enables you to do very well is because you've got that increased accuracy, landing special attacks is a lot easier. So if you're not aware, the way PSO attacks work is you have, obviously you've got your normal attacks, you have your hard attacks, and then most weapons you have a special attack as well. This doesn't because it's a basic handgun. But there is an accuracy penalty for each of these, so heavy attacks are inherently less accurate than normal attacks, and special attacks are less accurate than hard attacks. So because RAmar has such a high accuracy pool, it can very reliably use special attacks. That makes it fantastic for weapons that have very good special attacks tied to them. So what it enables you to do is use RAmar as a very, very good team support class, applying status effects to enemies, which are quite often done from your special attacks. Now, yes, you can apply some statuses from techniques, and you do have the ability to do that with RAmar as well, but typically you're going to be applying a lot of your status effects through various weapons. So overall, like most of the ranges in PSO, RAmar functions very well as a support character for a team. So you're going to be laying down a lot of sort of suppressing fire, and you're also going to be applying statuses to enemies, just to make them easier for the hunters to deal with. Now, there are a couple of gear recommendations in particular, and this honestly applies to pretty much all ranges. So there are a few weapons in the game that are, I don't really want to say it, but they are almost mandatory to get for ranges because they have such a profound impact on the game. They are... Oh, it took ages to kill. That's the lack of attack power there for you. So there are a couple of weapons that I would definitely consider going for. Most of them, unfortunately, are tied to ultimate mode, so you will have to get there to get them. But you can always trade for them as well. So the first one is the Frozen Shooter. So Frozen Shooter is a rifle. Usually drops from the rare hill dealt in Forest for a few section IDs, so from hill to tor. The way Frozen Shooter works is it's basically a rifle where its special attack fires a freeze beam. Now that freeze beam has pretty much... well, it is a guaranteed chance to freeze if it hits the enemy, and assuming the enemy can be frozen. There are a few enemies in the game that are immune to freeze, but not many. If that special attack hits the enemy, it will freeze them guaranteed. And that is unbelievable for support, particularly in really, really difficult areas such as the control tower or in seabed. Having that ability to just completely lock up an enemy by freezing it is fantastic. There is another version of the gun as well called the Snow Queen. Now, the Snow Queen has a few advantages and disadvantages over the Frozen Shooter. So, Snow Queen, if you're not aware how to get that, you basically need to get a Frozen Shooter and then go to Gallon's shop, and you want to buy a photon booster with photon drops, and then you use the photon booster on the Frozen Shooter, and that'll turn it into a Snow Queen. Now, advantages of the Snow Queen over the Frozen Shooter are the Snow Queen can actually freeze multiple enemies at once. So, when you fire the Snow Queen, what it does is it fires a shot, and enemies sort of near the shot will get frozen as well. So it has like a little cluster hit to it. The downside of Snow Queen is it can't combo. So you can only fire one shot at a time. So as you know with PSO, typically weapons have a 3-hit combo like this. With Snow Queen, you basically just go... Now the problem with that is, that means that you have to start your combo with a special attack. And as we've already covered, special attacks have the least accuracy. So a lot of weapons that can't combo are really difficult to use special attacks on effectively because you'll miss quite often with it being your first attack. However, RAmar, because you've got the highest accuracy in the game, you are probably one of the best classes to be able to use Snow Queen effectively. Honestly, most ranges will be able to at high level because they all have a lot of accuracy later on. But RAmar obviously has the highest of them all. You can see here I'm using heavy attacks and hitting fairly reliably. Now, admittedly, these guys have virtually no evade, but you get the idea. So Snow Queen is also a weapon I would consider. There are some situations where Snow Queen is better than Frozen Shooter. If you're only going to get one of them, though, I would definitely lean towards Frozen Shooter, just because that can combo. So if you are struggling with accuracy a little bit for some reason, you can basically go normal attack, heavy attack, and then into a special, or even do normal special. So definitely pick that up. The only downside with those weapons, apart from the small issue with the Snow Queen that I mentioned, is that they do actually randomly freeze you. So if you are going to use one of those, you might want to invest in getting a Cure Freeze as well, just to make sure it doesn't catch you out. The last thing you want to do is get frozen in a really awkward situation. The next weapon that we need to cover is the second part of like the recommended range weapons. So, and that is the spread needle. So a spread needle, unfortunately, only tends to drop in ultimate ruins, so you do need to get to quite a high level to be able to really hunt one effectively. It may be easy to just trade for one or hunt it with a different character. What the spread needle is, it's actually a rifle, but it shoots like a shot. So what I mean by that is, although it's a rifle, it actually shoots like a spread of, as the name suggests, a spread of needles in like a wide arc. So you can actually hit an arc of enemies directly in front of you. But it has rifle speed because it actually uses a rifle shooting animation. So think of it as effectively a shot, but can shoot faster. The main reason you get spread needle though is because of the special attack. So again, we're talking special attack. So again, we're relying on our accuracy a lot. And the main advantage of spread needle is that the special attack has paralysis special. Now that, particularly in ultimate mode, is absolutely fantastic for crowd control. There are certain areas in the game that you can completely lock down with the spread needle. Another option as well, I mentioned this briefly earlier when I was talking about the techniques that RAmar has. So I've already covered that RAmar doesn't have access to Gel or Zalo, and that Zalo would be nice to have. So one option you can actually go with a RAmar is to go for an S-rank weapon, which you get from S-rank in challenge mode. One of the specials that you can add to an S-rank weapon is the ability to add Zalo to it. And that's really, really useful for some classes that don't have access to it normally. There are also some other recommendations for S-rank weapons as well. So you could go with things like a Hell Needle, for example, which would have AoE instant kill. You could go with things like Demons weapons, which massively reduce enemy HP. And just to cover Devils and Demons specials, don't think you have to get a special weapon for those. If you can find, for example, a Demon's laser with hit or a Demon's handgun with hit, by all means use that because they are really, really good for certain enemies. Particularly really annoying enemies. So, for example, in episode 4, there is an enemy called Gerta Blulu, and it's really, really irritating. Rangers can take care of it really easily because you can just lock it down. I can't remember if you can freeze it offhand now because it's been a while since I fought one. But I think you can paralyze it. But you can also inflict demons on it as well. And demons reduces its health by 75%, which makes it a lot easier to deal with. So having access to all these really, really good weapons with useful special attacks makes RAmar a fantastic support class. Now, for solo player, RAmar is a relatively good class, so to be honest, all rangers are pretty strong solo, and a lot of it is tied down to equipment though, so you are going to, again, want to be looking for those frozen shooters and spread needles. If you can get those, then Ranger is a fantastic solo class because you can essentially just lock down most enemies. In regards to other gear that you want to be looking for, so we've kind of covered weapons. So mag builds, RAmar, honestly, you probably don't need that much accuracy on your mag, that much dex on your mag, because you've got such a high pool of it anyway. By all means, you could always run with a standard power mag, to be honest. So like a 5.145 50 mag would work fine on RAmar. 50 dex will be enough to get you to your ranger weapon equipment quite early. And then you've got a decent power pool on the mag as well to exploit the damage as well. Later on, you could potentially even drop the dex even a bit more and go with more power, because you'll have so much accuracy you might not even need 50 dex on your mag. And again, for the Photon Blast, I would go with probably with the typical 3. So I would probably go with Estella, Pillar, and Myla and Eula. Myla and Eula being particularly useful on RAmar, because although we do have Shifter and D-Band, we've only got level 15. And the level 21 that we get from Myla and Eula is a fairly significant boost over that. I mentioned with Hugh New World that the only disadvantage of it is that because it's a higher level Shifter and D-Band than you can cast normally, it will just run out after a while and it will leave you without Shifter and D-Band, so then you have to recast it. But I think with Hugh New World, it wasn't really an issue because you had level 20 Shifter and D-Band anyway, so it was only one level difference. But with RAmar, with it being quite a big difference between your Shifter and D-Band and the one you get from the Photon Blast, it's probably worth using Myla and Eula. And even if you don't use it, it's still worth getting just for when you play multiplayer. So if you do a Photon Blast chain, if no one else has Milo and you, at least you've got it, so you can apply that really high level shifter and D-band to the whole party. So other gear you might want to be interested in. So there is a shield called Ranger Wall, and Ranger Wall actually boosts your accuracy even more, so it's well worth taking. The way you get that is through the Gallon Shop quest. Now I have actually done a guide on Gallon Shop on my channel, so go and check that out if you haven't seen it. The way you get that is you need to get, I think it's about 300 gallon points. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's around 300 gallon points, somewhere around there. Once you've collected those gallon points, then you can trade for it. And it's basically a shield that just boosts your accuracy. That's a fantastic shield. There is other ways you can go as well. So Ranger can use some melee weapons fairly well. There are certain hunter weapons that you can use totally fine. You probably want to use a hunter weapon to some extent as well, particularly for episode 4, because the lizard enemies, so the satellite lizards and the Yowies, they actually are really awkward to take care of with Ranger. Because when you hit them with range weapons, they start to phase out, and after a while they become untargetable. So you kind of have to have a melee weapon to take care of those. Or use techniques, but with RAmar, you're probably not going to be wanting to use their level 15 attack techniques. So, in regards to units, you can go with the usual thing. So anything that increases your battle speed, so any of the battle units like Heavenly Battle or V101. Anything that increases your accuracy early on might help, just so you can get to your equip requirements a bit quicker. So things like Heavenly Arms. Later on, you may not need them later on just because you've got so much accuracy, so you might want to switch over to more power focus builds. On the subject of melee weapons that I've briefly covered, you might also want to look into weapons like slicers. So slicers are quite good melee weapons for taking care of multiple targets. Particularly if you can get one that has hit with a special like Berserk or Charge, they can be quite useful sometimes for certain enemies. You also might want to look into mech guns with sacrificial specials as well. They're fantastic on almost any class. So particularly late game, yeah, if you can get a pair of Charge Vulcans with hit, they will do fantastic damage, and honestly they'll outdamage a lot of the special weapons, providing you're willing to use the Charge special. Other options, so for the earlier game, mech guns like the MNA-60 Vice, they're not particularly strong, but they do have a Berserk special, so they can actually be really, really good. You can also use weapons early on, so things like Guilty Light and Photon Launcher, they're quite decent for taking out enemies that are kind of packed together. So the way they work is they fire a shot that pierces enemies. They are quite limited where you can use them effectively, but they're kind of a cool weapon type and interesting to play around with. What you'll probably find is when you are at low level, you'll probably tend to use some of the rarer handguns or the rifles. So you're probably going to be looking at things like the Varista, the Visk 235W. The Visk's actually not too bad because I believe that has a paralysis special. So it may work for you to some extent early on. It's not going to be fantastic, but for a sort of an early special weapon, it's not too bad. But definitely look for a MA-60 Vice because they can be quite good. Later on in the game, as I've mentioned, you just want to be looking for those frozen shooters and spread needles, and then maybe some rare mechs to go with it. Whether that's a Yasmin Cod 9000M, or some red mech guns, or something rarer such as a Milmator. If you are hunting something like that, though, it will be a lot of investment because it involves finding a Heaven Punisher. Now, I suppose, since we've mentioned Heaven Punisher, we should probably mention Heaven Striker as well. So Heaven Striker is a weapon it's incredibly strong. It's an episode 4 exclusive, so it's only in Blue Burst. Very, very strong gun with a Berserk special. But if you use it with a mag called the Striker unit, it can change the special attack to what's called Divine Punishment. And Divine Punishment is the same special that the Heaven Punisher handgun has. What it does is it creates a load of like light energy beams that hit all the targets near you. It's really, really good for actually locking up enemies because it kind of flinches them. You can see when I hit an enemy, they do flinch a little bit. The way that special works is it works on what's called beat time. So if I open my menu and you look at the bottom right, you'll see it says internet time at 566. So PSO uses a system called beat time. I'll probably cover it in another video at some point, but essentially some weapons are tied to beat time, various different interactions. So examples would be there's a weapon called Galatine, which gets stronger at certain beat times. Can't remember if the Morning Glory Claw does it as well. But Heaven Punisher and Heaven Striker are tied to it as well. So their Divine Punishment only works on, I can't know if it's even beats or odd beats. So what it'll be is on either odd or even, you'll fire a Berserk special, and then on the opposite one, you'll fire the Divine Punishment. But they're maybe worth looking into as well. So a Striker unit's probably a mag that's worth looking for, just for the interaction with the Heaven Striker. Honestly though, even without the Striker unit, Heaven Striker is a fantastic weapon and is really, really strong. So definitely worth hunting that as well. So now we're going to cover some of the disadvantages of the class as well, because every class in PSO has some downsides to it. So with RAmar, the main disadvantage is that you're kind of in this middle of the road. So although you have fantastic accuracy, all rangers have fantastic accuracy. It's just that you have slightly better than the others. As a support role, although you are really, really useful if you're using the usual ranger gear like the Spread Needle and Frozen Shooter, there are other rangers that are better support generally. So RAmar, for example, the female human ranger, she has access to much higher level techniques, so she can take level 20 techniques, and she gets access to the full suite of Shifter, Divine, Gel, and Zalur. So she's a much better support role, so she'll be better at keeping your party alive as like a backup healer. She'll be better at buffing the party if there's no force, and she'll be better at, well, she'll be a lot better at debuffing enemies as well, because RAmar doesn't get access to that without weapons that have the special. So that's one area that RAmar kind of struggles. The other way it struggles as well is it's also, to an extent, outclassed by the Android Rangers. So Android Rangers have access to traps. Now, having the ability to drop a trap in a spawn of enemies and then hit it with a gun from a distance is unbelievably useful. So, for example, an Android Ranger could wait for an enemy to spawn, drop a freeze trap, freeze the enemy, and then if it breaks out of that, you've got your Frozen Shooter or Spread Needle. Similarly, they can use confused traps, and they can detonate them from a distance with by firing at the trap, or even just damage traps, and they are brilliant support. Again, obviously, Android Rangers are different because they won't be able to provide any sort of team support in terms of healing or buffs, but RAmar is kind of in this awkward position in between them where it's not quite as good team support as RAmar in terms of keeping your team alive and buffing and debuffing, but it's also not as good for offensive support as Androids because of the lack of traps. However, it is a really, really good compromise between the two. So because you still have techniques, you can still provide support, and because you have the accuracy, you've got the ability to use these range weapons that can provide that offensive support as well. So don't for any reason feel like it's a bad class by any means, because it isn't. It's just that all of the rangers work slightly differently and are better at certain things than others. The main advantage of using a RAmar is just that because you've got the higher accuracy, you are going to be able to equip things a bit sooner. And your health is quite high as well, so you're actually a fairly survivable class as well. Not so much at low level, but it does seem to ramp up later on. So one thing we should probably quickly talk about is challenge mode. So for challenge mode, RAmar is not a bad pick. It wouldn't be one of my first choices, but typically with RAmar, because of the high accuracy, you are going to be able to use most of the range weapons that drop in challenge mode, and you've got that little bit of health as well, so you might be able to take a hit here and there. Downsides is that obviously you're not going to be able to support your team with traps, which are fantastic for challenge mode because they can just lock down entire spawns. And typically that's about the only disadvantage of a RAmar in challenge mode. The lack of text isn't really an issue because you're probably not going to be using them in challenge mode anyway. You're going to be reserving the text for your force. So generally RAmar is not a bad pick for challenge mode, but if you've got an Android Ranger, that would probably be my first pick for a Ranger. So I hope that's been a fairly interesting look at the RAmar class. I am going to do one of these for every single class in PSO, so there'll be 12 of these videos in total. RAmar is a class I definitely have less experience in, but I hope I've given you a reasonable idea of how the class works, what it's good at and what it's not so good at. It is a really, really solid class overall, and if you are interested in Ranger, you really can't go wrong with a RAmar. So for the meantime, I'll end this video there. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider liking or subscribing to the channel. You can also follow me on Twitter as well, which is at Section Skylie. And I tend to post when I'm going live over there and when I'm uploading videos as well, so keep an eye on that. Additionally, if you're seeing this when it goes out live, I will be live streaming on the same day as well on YouTube. I'll probably just be playing through some PSO, so feel free to come and check that out as well. But for now, I'll end this one there, and I'll see you guys in the next video.